Well, hello again, my friends. This is Paul Elson, sometimes known as the Farmer. Welcome back to those of you who've seen my videos. I hope everybody had a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year coming up. As we get into the new year, I wish you all the best. Today I'm going to talk about a story that you've heard probably in a simpler form, but it's a famous story in the Bible, a story of the prodigal son. Now, what I'm going to show you is there's a lot more to this story than you realize. A lot of insights and weavings up and down, and it becomes basically a complex five-part story. So follow me to the end, and where I will ask you a question. It'll be about what you understand from this and your response to it. The story most commonly told is the simple story of a younger son in a family asking for his inheritance early, then leaving home, going to the city with unhealthy attractions, spending all his inheritance on bad influences, losing it all, having to work on a pig farm, realizing his stupidity, and returning home to his father and family. Now, that's a simplified summary, I realize that, but that is not the whole story. The real story is of the son, the father, the brother, the community, which you probably have never heard about before, and God. Each of these parts form their own part of the story, and that makes it complete. A picture that is of what happened when the son left, the city townspeople not wanting him back, the brother's jealousy, and the father's joy. Now the father was willing to humiliate himself. That's God's part. And receive back into the family. The wayward son is another fascinating part of this story. So let's review the whole story now and then go from there. A man had two sons. The younger son asked his father to give him his inheritance early. Now there's a lot of detail in that I'll tell you about later. The father then gave the younger son his share of the inheritance. But let's clarify a point here. In that culture, at that time, the oldest son's portion of the estate would have been double the younger son's shares. So if you're still with me here, at the end, I want you to respond to that portion. So keep going. When the father would have died, the older son would receive 2/3 shares. The portion left, 1/3, would have gone to the younger son. The law also allowed daughters to benefit from an inheritance. In this case, however, there were only two sons, so the eldest would have gotten 2/3 of the estate, the younger only 1/3 of the estate. But here's the kicker. In this case, the father's not dead yet, so there is no inheritance to give. He's still alive. You see, legally, the father had no obligation to give any of his children any of their potential inheritance early. Culturally, to ask for your inheritance before your parents' death caused several serious family and social issues. In those days, the Jewish Hebrew culture considered such a request as this son's as a severe insult to the father. Such a request was considered the same as wishing your father was dead. In other words, this would deal with the God deniers in today's world, okay? Wishing God was dead or God doesn't exist. The legal standard of the time was that the father had full and sole control over his property as long as he was alive. Remember, this is a story about God too. God is absolutely sovereign over all. The son had no legal authority. He could not transfer any of it into his name, had no authority to sell any of it. You cannot take or sell what you do not own. The request made by the son showed extreme disrespect, violated every standard of the cultural behavior, and brought serious shame to the whole family. I will finish the son's part now, but remember what I just showed you, but we'll get back to that soon. The father does give the son his inheritance, but legally he could only give the 1/3 of the estate to his son. Remember the older son rule. The words the younger son used to ask for his inheritance are interesting. If you study the way it's phrased in the Bible, the Greek words, for example, used in the Bible carry with it an attitude. The younger son said, in effect, Give me my property. The phrasing indicates a selfish attitude of the younger son. It's like today when you hear some commercials. It's my property. I want it now. That was kind of the attitude that the phrasing suggests. So you can see in such an attitude in that particular culture, that would not have been well thought of. By giving the son his inheritance, the father showed his love, his grace, and his mercy to his son by giving him some wealth. Now the son leaves home, travels to a city, and while there in the city, the son squanders his inheritance on wine, women, and song, so to speak. So when a person has large sums of money, I'm guessing he had lots of new friends who wanted to party at his expense until the money was gone. And then they were also gone, leaving the son alone with no place to go but down. He probably felt on top of the world as long as the money lasted, but now he needed a job to survive. Remember, he was in a Gentile world, okay? He was a Jew in a Gentile world, and I'll get back to that. He was probably dirty, smelly, and did not have any known skills that would help him find a good job. He ended up working on a pig farm. If that is the only job you can qualify or find, it does not speak well of your appearance or your skills. If you have never been around pigs, it is not a nice, clean job site. I spent some time in my younger years on a farm. We had cows, bulls, pigs, chickens, cats, dogs, the normal type stuff. Pigs are filthy. They eat awful food. Pigs live in the mud and the slop where they also eat. So for the son to feed and care for pigs was as low as a person could get in that society. Also, don't forget that the Hebrew culture avoided pigs at all costs. They did not own pigs. They did not eat pig meat. They sacrificed pigs or have anything to do with pigs. But wait, there's more, much more to the story. So this son, by working on a pig farm, was violating every social and religious rule that he grew up with. If you study Luke 15:13, it says, "Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had." The Greek words, the way it's written, imply that the son sold his shares as quickly as possible, took the cash, and got out of town as fast as he could. The son's actions show several things: that he was immature, he was frustrated, in fact, so frustrated that he just wanted out, away from his family. He was also angry. He became absent. He totally separated himself from his family. He neither wanted nor had any contact with his family after he left. He then became embarrassed, regretful, and possibly appreciative. The autonomy he had so desperately wanted became a nightmare of isolation from everything and everyone he knew. But he also knew his family had treated him, his brother, and their workers quite well. Now he was maturing. His family frustration was going away. His anger had become regret. However, you notice it says he did not ask for forgiveness. Now there's a key to that. In his mind, he did acknowledge the shame he caused his father, his family, and the community. He also knew the consequences of his actions. His rejection of family and community and the rules of the community made him untouchable. He could no longer be accepted as a member of the community again. The city life he had run to now offered him no hope, no career, no friends, nothing but pigs. He was a Hebrew in a Gentile world. He was now learning humility and submission. I have a phrase saying that I often use: God gets submission through submersion. Now, you can use that several different ways. This son had submersed himself in a life of revelry. Now he had to learn submission. It was time for him to go to his father and ask for help, not forgiveness. Asking forgiveness would have been asking to be fully reinstated, and he could not do that. But there was another problem: the community. The community he walked away from. In those times, farmers did not usually live on their farm. Enemies would often rush in, steal your animals, crops, even some of your people, to make them slaves. So farmers lived in small settlements on their farm. Look at the picture to the right. That kind of gives you the idea. The father is coming to greet the son. But look in the background there, there's a small community. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. These communities had several other families. Being close together offered security and safety. During the day, they would go out to their farm, work and care for animals, return at night, and put their herds in pens with watchmen and store grain in bins and stuff like that. In the son's case, the whole community would have known about him, rebelling against his family, insulting his father, and leaving for the city life. Everybody knew everyone, often including their problems. God and the Hebrews had made rules of conduct. If you did not live by them, you were kicked out of the tribe or family. You were no longer a welcome member with any rights. In fact, it was often worse than you realize. In that community, if the community saw the son returning, which they would have because he was approaching the small community, the town, and his home, the people would have gone out to stop him before he could come too close. Okay, now the key here is when they went out to do that, they would have been trying to force him to stay away. They could have thrown stones at him, which they often did, and they could have thrown shards of pottery or something like that at him. Okay, they threw the stones at the son when he tried to return. Then the townspeople would have an official ceremony when he left. Kind of backing up a little bit here. It's called the Kaziza ceremony. When the son left, the people would have brought clay watering jars, maybe broken ones, stuff they were going to get rid of, pots, put them in a central place on the edge of town, broken them to pieces. This represented their final rejection of the son. The son could not have been forgiven after this. He was done. He was gone. He was persona non grata. There's an old Jewish saying that says, a man's clothes bring him honor. Now, you're going to say, what does that mean? We're going to get into some detail here pretty quick. But there's another custom that now comes into play. In those days, adult men wore 2, possibly 3 layers of clothes, depending on the season and the weather. During warm times, they wore what we call linen or cotton underwear. Over that, they would wear a very loose-fitting robe that hung down to just above their ankles. In cold weather, they would have added an outer garment made of heavier material for warmth in that weather, so to speak. But one absolute rule was that men did not run, period. It was also a practical rule. Because of the undergarment wrapping in the outer robe, they just could not run safely. The only time you were allowed to run was in battle or an emergency. You have heard the term, gird up your loins. That means lifting up your robe and your underclothing, wrapping them around your waist or tying them up high, so to speak, somehow, so that your legs were free to run without getting snapped or trapped in the robe and stumbling and falling. So the only time, again, you were allowed to run is in an emergency or in a fight, okay? So as foreign influences came in, and I'm talking now as this society progressed, men in battle or sports competition would wear undergarments like a sort of pants that came down to just above the knees. This later became a sort of pants that was called a brakai, or braque, I guess, a bit like Bermuda shorts. But in the times of this story, no such thing was acceptable. So if the town leaders saw the prodigal's father running, they would have had a fit and certainly stopped him or tried to punish him. God even speaks to this in the Old Testament. You were not allowed to see a man's legs, thighs, or buttocks. So how does this relate to the story? Let me give you an idea of how serious God was and the culture was about a man not showing his lower body skin. Exodus 16:36 says, because you poured out your lust and exposed your nakedness. What they're talking about here is a man going to visit prostitutes where he undressed himself and then had sex with the prostitute. Or Exodus 20:26. Now this is talking about to the priests or people that had robes. You shall not go up by steps to my Father, meaning like the altar or the temple, that your nakedness be not exposed on it. What they were saying is that people could see underneath the robe if you walked up like a ladder or steps where they could look up and see your legs and your thighs and possibly even your buttocks. So from Adam and Eve being naked in the garden, where they felt no shame for their nakedness until their disobedience, God originally intended nakedness to not be shameful until disobedience changed it all. Then with God, all the rules changed. God's attitude toward a man showing lower body skin like legs, thighs, or buttocks brought stern warnings to not expose yourself. Then the priesthood later clarified it even more by adding more warnings and restrictions. So you can see why the father we are looking at was required to keep himself under their rules. He was part of their community. No pulling up of the robe in order to run. Period. Stop. Don't do it. However, the father did run. How does the father's running to meet his son relate to the prodigal story? I'll show you. When the son was returning home, but yet some way off, in Luke 15:20, it says, his father saw him, had compassion, and ran, fell on his neck, and kissed him. Okay? Look at the picture to the right. The son kneeling there, arms open, wanting to welcome his father running to the son to welcome the son. Okay, but you notice three things. The father had compassion, the father ran, and the father kissed him. Two of those three were socially unacceptable. Man did not run, and you did not kiss your rebellious son. The son, by his own actions, was no longer an accepted member of the family or the community. They were to turn a cold shoulder to him. However, you may not know why the father ran to his son. It was for two reasons. First of all, he was happy to see his son. He loved his son. But second reason was he had to beat the townspeople. They also would have seen the son. It was their duty to meet the son, tell him he was not welcome, and tell him to go away. The younger son had chosen the life of the Gentiles over that of being a Hebrew. But how would the people stop the son from entering their community in the son's home? Okay, they would have done this by going out to block him from entering the area, by throwing shards of clay or stones at him. They could not kill him, but they were allowed to drive him away. So the father had to run faster than the townspeople to be at his son's side before the people reached the son. Then by embracing and kissing his son, the father prevented the people from further destructive actions. The father was saying to the townspeople, I am willing to forgive and welcome my son back home. Now the humiliating part was that the father would have had to show his legs by lifting up his robe and gown to run. The Jews believed that clothing was a person's honor. It has to be visible to others because that would show your status, but also it had to cover the skin. Lifting up the robe to run was a grave no-no. The father was willing to humiliate himself before all of the people by openly showing his compassion, running to and kissing his son. When the rest of the community and the older son rejected the younger son, the father was willing to forgive and accept his son, restoring their relationship to what it was before. However, there's some keys to this. The son had lost his inheritance, but was back in the family. He was not as a slave or a worker, but as a son. Remember what the son expected, though. Was the son forgiven? Did the son repent? Did he ask for forgiveness? Did he expect forgiveness? Yes, he was forgiven. Yes, he showed a repentant attitude. No, he did not ask for forgiveness because he knew that asking for forgiveness would have given him complete status back in his family. He could not have done that, okay? The rules did not allow that. Nor did he expect forgiveness because he knew the rules. He asked only to be treated like one of the hired help or farm workers. But what was the father's response? He joyously welcomed him home. He gave him a ring. He gave him a robe that the son had formerly owned, and he gave him new sandals. The ring in those times meant that the son was given family authority. The robe meant that the son was reinstated to his prior relationship. Now, in those days, the father would have kept the robe, okay, hoping the son would return. That way, he would have given his son his original family robe. Now, remember, the robe in those days, okay, and I'll read you something here from the Jewish history, okay. The robe represents honor and status. It signified the father's acceptance and restoration of his son, indicating that he was now a valued family member. The ring symbolized authority and belonging. The ring signifies the son is reinstated with full authority within the family, again, reflecting his family status. And the sandals, that's an interesting part. Okay, the ring meant he had authority. The robe meant he was reinstated. Okay, we got that. The sandals meant he was to wash his feet, get rid of the dust and dirt from his failed past, and put on new shoes for his new life. Now the other son. This son, upon knowing of his brother's return and welcoming that was given to him, was upset, angry, jealous, and unwilling to welcome his brother. You see, this is a life picture of how God sees us in our world. Like the older son, we see this as our world, our rules. We don't like it when somebody else is allowed to bypass our rules and seemingly be rewarded for behavior we don't like. Bad people seemingly get blessings and rich. That is not fair. The older son lived by the rules. He respected the rules. And rules are often made for good reasons, safety, health, a lot of other things. But when the rules replace love, compassion, forgiveness, the society that those rules are in becomes very stoic and often inhumane and harsh. The older son's story is timeless because it shows humanity as it really is. Too many of our leaders have too much power. They make rules, they make laws that are hard to follow, even harder for people who break those rules. It is controlled by keeping the people in line, so to speak. You remember the story of King David when he banished his son for breaking the rules, for the violations he did. Then later allowing the son to come back close to the community, but not in full authority back in the family, but was given strict rules about his daily life and where he was allowed to go. See, even King David would not see his son again. So you see, the story we call the Prodigal Son has many more parts than most people realize. Many of our human attitudes and emotions are in this story. Anger, immaturity, frustration, selfishness, embarrassment, humility, rebellion, jealousy, mercy, forgiveness, acceptance, social pressure, and rules that are hard to follow. But did you notice a major missing part? Where were the women? Where was the mother in this story? Where were the women? Through no mention of women, God is telling us men who often make or enforce the rules, be careful. We are not to be forgetful of mercy, forgiveness, love, and acceptance. Now, don't take that to mean it's replacing rules. We still have to have rules, but they have to be tempered with mercy and love and forgiveness. Okay, it's time to ask you a question. If you would be so kind, send me your answer. Send it to my email address I've got listed there. Explain to me in your thoughts where God is in this story. How does the story show anything about God and you? Thanks, my friends. Thank you for your time. I am your friend, your brother in Christ, the farmer, Paul E. I'm looking forward to your answers.